But also specificity. Which bank? It doesn't matter which one. Again, it's just a bank. And then once again, persisting on specificity is not going to cut it. It's only going to draw the same cultural responses. What's wrong with this person? Don't they trust me? Why does he or she think I'm lying? What happens is that the Aboriginal person will become defensive and questioning becomes even more difficult. Example 3, the same problem arises with numbers, percentages and measurements. So there were people outside the hotel. Yes. How many people were there? I don't know, might be 5 or 6. Big mob, I think. Now, to an English speaker, there's a distinct difference between 5 and 6 and an even bigger difference between 6 and 13. But you said before that there were 5 men outside the hotel that day, isn't that right? Yeah, and now you've changed your mind. Now you're saying there were 6. Ding, ding, lights flash and bells ring. We think as a cross-examiner that we're being very clever because now we're going to trip him up, right? So who was the 6th man? There was another man there, wasn't there? And that man was Mr. X, wasn't it? Or could have been Mr. X, couldn't it? The problem with the last question is that it is a double negative, which is confusing, particularly for Indigenous people. Now, to an English speaker, there's a distinct difference between 5 and 6, or 3 and 4, or 7 and 8. But to an Aboriginal speaker, the difference is not significant, where you have an emphasis on the social dimension of things, and that may be one fella, two fella, and big mob. So really, you'd get a better response by asking who was there as opposed to how many. Now, remember, the emphasis is on social relationships, not numbers. So can you tell the court who was there? Oh, yeah, Uncle Johnny, my cousin brother, was there with his 2 nephews. They called me grandfather. That station manager was there, but that one married to Rosie, niece for my wife's sister. And that boy belonged to that Riverside mob. I don't know who he is because they're another tribe. I don't know where he's from. Might be Fitzroy or Halls Creek. So can you see what's beginning to happen here? What's starting to happen is you're getting more information about who was there, and you as the solicitor, counsel, magistrate or judge can do the counting for yourself. So in this context, the Aboriginal speaker is specific and not general, but the difference is culturally based because who is related to who is the essence of Aboriginal society. Some of you may have heard of the Pinkenbar case, and Diane Eade writes a lot about this, and really she examines the cross-examination of 3 young Aboriginal boys, aged 12, 13 and 14, in a committal hearing. And she looks at the transcript and identifies serious cultural and linguistic issues which need to be appreciated to accurately understand the boys' answers to many of the questions put in cross-examination. And she identifies 3 areas of particular concern. 1, gratuitous concurrence, the role of silence, and eye contact. Now, do people know what I mean by, or have heard the term gratuitous concurrence? Are you aware of what that phenomenon is? Okay. Yeah, they answer yes to questions to please the interrogator. It happens quite a lot, and I'm told it's a frequent problem with Vietnamese people as well, and I'm sure some other cultural groups. So it's a characteristic Aboriginal strategy for dealing with interviews, particularly in situations of serious power imbalances. And the literature on gratuitous concurrence suggests that to subject Aboriginal speakers to a series of yes-no questions in particular, and in an intimidating situation, is going to invite contradictory answers regardless of the subject matter. The cross-examination by counsel for the police officers in this hearing was full of gratuitous concurrence, and here's just one example. And you knew when you spoke to these 6 police in the valley that you didn't have to go anywhere with them if you didn't want to, didn't you? The kid says, no. And you knew that, mister. I'd suggest to you, please do not lie. You knew that you didn't have to go anywhere if you didn't want to, didn't you? Didn't you? Didn't you? So he's being very intimidatory, and what happens? Kid switches his answer. Yep. He said no before, but yep. Why did you just lie? Why did you just say no, mister? You want me to suggest a reason to you, mister. The reason was this, that you wanted this court to believe that you thought that you had to go with the police. Isn't that so? The little kid goes, yep. And you lied to the court. you lied to the court, trying to put one over the court, didn't you? And the kid thinks, no, I didn't do that. No, that was your reason, mister, wasn't it? Wasn't it? Wasn't it, mister? Yeah, remember he's talking to kids, and so the kid says, yes. And he says, yes, because wasn't it? Yes. So the last question has a complex grammatical structure with 4 embedded clauses, which could confuse many witnesses, not only children who speak Aboriginal English, and this is where my knowledge of socio-linguistics is probably different from Jill's. But a literal interpretation of all of the yes or yep or your yes answers elicited from these witnesses would lead to the conclusion that boys were frequently contradicting themselves and could not be reliable witnesses. But such an interpretation reveals a lack of understanding of basic linguistic differences between Aboriginal English and Standard English. And Eade says it would be absurd to conclude this case on the basis of a literal interpretation of answers given by the boys, although this appears to be exactly what happened. The other issue she talks about is the role of silence and the fact that silence sits much more comfortably with Indigenous people than non-Indigenous people. And what the police drew from that, the inferences, was that the kids, again, were lying just because they're being silent. For example, well, why did you lie to me and tell me you'd just stolen a pair of jeans from a shop? I'd suggest the reason to you, because you don't want everyone to know the little criminal that you are, do you? That's the reason, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it? Your silence probably answer it, but I'll have an answer from you. That's the reason, isn't it? And the bench says, I'm asking you to answer the question. Ask the question again, please, mister. I'm suggesting to you that you don't want the court to know the little criminal you are. Isn't that right? And the kid just goes, yes. This example illustrates another serious misinterpretation of a widespread Aboriginal communication pattern, namely the use of silence as a positive and normal part of conversation. A third issue involved the boys' use of the cultural practice of avoiding eye contact. I've just got the 5 sign, that's good, not a high five. But not looking is about respecting elders. And so that was misinterpreted as, not being, once again, truthful. And I guess what I'm trying to point out here is that the ways of getting at the truth in the Western legal system are totally different from the ways that Indigenous people would get at the truth. And it's just a problem that is there. And I don't know how you get to overcome that, but these problems exist. So what are the solutions, you ask? Well, Richard Trudgeon, who wrote a book called Why Warriors Lie Down and Die, suggests that we become bilingual in English and in Aboriginal language. Because he says you've got to understand the cultural worldview of any people before you can truly understand what they're talking about or where they're coming from. He went up to Arnhem Land and he tells how he was walking in the bush one day. I'm coming to the conclusion. Walking in the bush one day along with his Yolngu teachers, one of the old men said to him, Richard, you can hear spear grass growing during the wet season. Trudgeon says, well, my Balanda brain, working from my Balanda cultural knowledge base, had real trouble believing him. As they continued walking along, he heard some familiar sounds. He says he turned to the old man and said, what's the name of that frog that calls out a long, mournful sound in the wet season? The old man started laughing. Then he said, that one? Don't you Balanda know anything? That's not a frog. That's the spear grass growing. Now, years later, I do believe you can hear the spear grass grow, even though many people from my own cultural group will not believe me until someone qualified does a documentary or study on it. Then it will become accepted knowledge. Within the cultural knowledge of the dominant culture. Until that happens, my younger friends and I will be considered a little weird, because when it comes to hearing grass grow, our cultural knowledge base has a different form from that of the dominant culture. And what I want to say to you is that I've tried to impress upon you some of the miscommunication problems that exist. And if you want to truly understand the situation, you have to open your ears and your hearts. And when, like Trudgeon, you actually get to hear spear grass grow, then, my friend, we can speak as equals.
Reluctant to interrupt the applause. Thank you, Munya. I think if we were to combine what we've learnt from the panel so far, it's really the importance of context, isn't it? Like, I don't think we can look at Aboriginal interactions with the legal system without understanding everything that's behind that, whether that's the intergenerational injustice that's led up to that point or the cross-cultural communication difficulties we have surrounding the legal system.